This video is sponsored by Klook. When you're looking for a new camera in 2025, it can feel like you're looking at the same camera with the same features, just with a different brand name on. But I'm looking for something that has some character, a little bit of spice, a certain je ne sais quoi. But no camera today really gives me that feeling. They just don't make them how they used to. Back when mirrorless cameras first hit the scene, we had a lot of interesting cameras. Take Fujifilm for example. They created digital cameras that imitated the feeling of shooting on an analog camera in relatively small sizes. Or Lumix and Olympus, creating these very small micro four thirds cameras with incredibly compact size and great interchangeable lenses. But today, each of these brands is kind of just making the same camera as everyone else, and they seem to have lost any identity or character. Today, mirrorless camera features, specs, and even design are all slowly converging to the same point. Much like F1, at the beginning of a season, all the teams design their cars slightly differently, but then when one does well, they all slowly copy that team, and by the end of the year, they look relatively similar. Fujifilm, who used to only make these quirkier, photography-centric cameras, now also produce cameras with fantastic video specs in bodies that look less and less like their original designs. And Lumix, they no longer make their GX line, GF line, or GM line, these smaller, incredible versions of the Micro Four Thirds mount system, and instead they're just making full-frame hybrid cameras, like everybody else. Maybe only Olympus, now OM System, who went through this weird sale 4 years ago, but now we have the OM3, which actually looks like a new, quite promising iteration of the Micro Four Thirds mount system. And if that does well, and they see that feedback, maybe we'll see more cameras like that from them, and maybe they'll inspire other brands. But what is it about these older, smaller, slightly quirkier cameras that really make them stand out? Well, I think for me, I really enjoy a camera for carrying around everyday photography that inspires me to pick it up and use it. I find that there's a general rule that the older the camera, the weirder and funkier it usually is. Not always, but usually. Take some of the first digital cameras ever made, for example. These things are very old and very funky. These much older digital cameras aside though, if you fast forward a few years to the CCD sensor DSLR cameras, much like the Nikon D200 that I shot with in London last year, these cameras offer a different kind of charm with their CCD sensor technology. However, that novelty does wear off, because at the end of the day, what's inside the camera, the sensor, isn't really that inspiring to make you go out and shoot, much less than the actual exterior of the camera you are usually interacting with. When it comes to finding an older digital camera that's still small enough to be able to carry with you all the time and ticks the boxes you need in terms of usability, it can be quite a lot of effort to find one. Almost as much effort as making travel plans. Finding accommodation, booking journeys, and keeping track of it all can feel overwhelming, especially when you're in a different country, and that's where Klook comes in. Klook is a platform designed to simplify the entire experience. Klook has thousands of activities and experiences in destinations all over the world, all in one place. And with support for over a dozen languages and 40 currencies, it's built to work wherever you are. I've been using Klook to plan my own trips here in France, and my next destination to be revealed very soon. Recently, I used Klook to book a rental car in an upcoming travel destination, which I'm very excited for. The whole process was simple, and the price I got was cheaper than other comparison sites. They also have regular deals and promotions, which can help your travel budget go even further. So if you're planning a trip, check out Klook. Download the app today using the link on your screen, and you can use my code GeorgeHolden at checkout to book your next adventure. In my experience of indulging in my own camera curiosity, I found this kind of a sweet spot of older cameras, from roughly 9 or 10 years ago. This wasn't on purpose, but many of the cameras I've actually reviewed on the channel have come from 2012, 2014, 2016. This seems to be a good window of age relative to today for having good value, low price cameras that have just the right level of specs for everyday photography without being overkill with unnecessary video specs that then drive their prices up. Much like this Fujifilm X-T2 from 2016, which I just made a first impressions video on last week. Around this time, cameras like this had fantastic photography specs, and they just started to get some video specs. The X-T2 has 4K video and F-log recording, but it's not very good, the autofocus isn't usable, and there's no image stabilization, so the price has stayed relatively down to earth. I could also include the Olympus OM-D E-M10 from 2014 that fits into this category, or the Lumix GX80, which also comes from 2016, which actually does have good IBIS 4 video, but still falls back in a few areas. But before we get carried away here, reason needs to have a voice. Of course, none of these cameras are gonna suddenly make you a better photographer the second you pick them up. That's just not possible. The same way that if you were to go out and buy the latest flagship from Sony or Canon, the A1 II or the Canon R1, neither of those are going to make you a better photographer. It's all about the camera that suits your needs and, more importantly, gets you out taking photos. That could be a film camera, an early digital camera, or just a bog standard modern entry-level camera. There's this little bit of me that sometimes needs to loosen up when I'm shooting photos. And sometimes when I'm out with a larger camera, with a large lens, I don't really free up as much. However, when I have a smaller, older, often cheaper camera, something about me just kind of frees up. I start pressing my shutter much more often, I don't put so much pressure on each photo, and I kind of just have fun with it. And it's much more of a mental thing. Like, so much of photography is mental. And often, having a camera that really inspires you to go out and shoot and be bold with your camera is going to help you take those few extra steps to get those more interesting photos. I've only had a limited time shooting with the Fujifilm X-T2 so far, but I've had a great time shooting with it in Porto and also in France. And the zone focusing setup that you can create, that I talked about in my previous video, actually makes the street photography experience so much more like shooting on a film camera without the faff of trying to create a makeshift zone focusing experience with a dedicated manual focus lens on a digital camera. I talk about that a lot more in this video up here, if you want to give it a watch. I also find that it's one of these cameras that non-photographers take more interest in. They see the dials, they see the front, it looks a bit less like a digital camera, and I think people take it a little bit less seriously. I could say pretty much the same thing about the Olympus OM-D E-M10 Mark 1 and 2. Those two cameras are also incredibly amateur looking, vintage looking, and also much smaller than you might expect from images that you see on the internet. I found actually shooting with those cameras really encouraged me to get out in crowds and look like a bit more of an idiot with my camera. That helped me get some really interesting photos. And of course, I want to talk about the camera that I left behind in the UK, and that is the Lumix GX80. That is pretty much the sweet spot of having an incredibly small camera body with an interchangeable lens mount that still has an EVF and a tilt screen. It does many things right. I found that camera really encourages me to get out there and put myself in different situations. Also, the interface is probably up there with one of the best I've used, something that I am missing on the X-T2 at the moment. However, they are very much two completely different cameras with strengths in some areas and weaknesses in others that the other one makes up for. So I really enjoyed shooting with both of these pretty much equally. I'd have to say that with both of these cameras, they both encourage me to put myself out there much more, to take those few extra steps, to engage on the street, and to get those more interesting images. And if you like the colours you're currently seeing in these photos, you can pick up my Kodak film stop presets, my Fujifilm film stop presets, and my naturally filmic presets. And you can save when you buy all 3 packs together in the 3-pack bundle, and viewers of this video can use this unique code to save an extra 20% at checkout. These are some of the best film simulation presets you can buy, and you see these in this video, on my Instagram, and on my website portfolio. So I'll drop a link in the description for you to check those out. Before I go, I want to give you a quick list of cameras that I'd recommend to you as budget options for getting started with a cheap everyday camera for street photography. And I'll drop some links to the MPB site below for your different regions so you can pick them up. First, I'm going to recommend the Lumix GX7. This is very similar to the GX80, but often can be found much cheaper, has a slightly beefier grip, and has an articulating EVF, which is kind of fun. But I would say this one you can find for much cheaper than the GX80 in used condition, so it's definitely worth taking a look. And then another Lumix that I'd like to recommend is the Lumix GX1. I got to shoot with this camera in Copenhagen like 2 years ago now, and I thought it was a fantastic little camera. The shutter sound has no business being as loud and mechanical as it is, but the camera is so well set up with a great touchscreen, and you can often find this for much cheaper, especially when compared to the Lumix GM1, which is also incredibly small, but sometimes harder to find online in used condition. And lastly, I'd like to recommend a very early Sony camera. The Sony NEX that I made a video on like 2 years ago. You have access to absolutely every single Sony E and FE mount lens in a very small compact body. Specifically, the NEX and earlier Sony cameras do have kind of a funky layout and menu system, even weirder than even modern Sony camera menus, and it can take some getting used to. But the image quality you're going to get out of these cameras is fantastic if you don't mind a camera with little to no video specs to talk about. If you're interested in any of these cameras, I'm going to drop links to the original videos I did on these cameras in the description below, along with the links to their MPB product pages. And if you want to see a different video from me, YouTube thinks you're going to love this one next. I have no idea what it is, but YouTube reckons this is for you.